As we designed our units, we really had to make sure that people understood that we weren't hiding breastfeeding. It was about actually having a conversation about all the different ways that you have to feed a baby, pumping, breastfeed. And even if you're using our pods to bottle feed, that's no judgment. When you're pumping, you are attaching yourself to an apparatus. You usually need to be sitting down. You're pumping milk, you're filling it into vessels that can get messy. There is the need to usually plug in a pump. I think the other thing is with breastfeeding and with pumping is there's this letdown response. So your brain has to be in the headspace and comfortable and confident in order to relax your body, and then you're going to be more productive.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich, and I'm also the founder of the Goodness Exchange, which is like the mothership of this podcast. Over there, you can see thousands of articles that we've written and published over the last 10 years about what's right with the world. Yes, it is still an amazing place out there, despite what the negative news would have us think. And on that website and this podcast, we are celebrating the people who are changing our shared future. They're not getting nearly enough light shown on them, and they are full of insights that can give us all hope and inspiration for our own causes and the things that we're passionate about. And we're going to start today by talking to just exactly one of those kind of innovators. Today, our guest, Sascha Mayer, and her co-founder, Christine Dodson. You probably know their work before their name. If you're ever in an airport, a stadium, big business buildings, you're going to see what I would call a pod that is for breastfeeding and nursing related practices. Like a lot of pumping is happening out there in the world these days. And this is the brainchild of Sascha and Christine. They are two of those kind of innovators that we like to celebrate most. They saw a problem and they just set out to solve it. And that story is amazing. So welcome, Sascha Mayer.
Thanks, Linda. I'm excited to talk to you.
Well, I got to say, we're fellow Vermonters here in the North Country, and I'd like you to start off by telling us a little bit of your story, because Vermont, I've interviewed many Vermont innovators, and I think your story kind of has a Vermonty tone to it. You know, we're pretty accepting of things, no matter which side of the political equation you're on. We kind of have a live and let live thing going on. And most of us celebrate folks like you. So give us a little bit of your story, because This is a journey that I guess I don't know. Do you even have competitors out there in the world?
Yeah, well, we can talk a little bit about that. But yeah, I think we're accepting, but we're also stubbornly independent and like to solve problems. So really our business, Mamava, came about from our own experience. So Christine and I were young moms, and we loved our jobs working for a design studio in Burlington. But the majority of our clients were out of town. And when we went back to work after having kids, we wanted to continue breastfeeding. And the only way to do that is to be able to pump. And we had a really supportive employer and a private office we could use at the design studio. But when we hit the road, we were constantly using these very substandard locations to make food for a new vulnerable human. And what I'm talking about there is a restroom for the most part, but pumping in cars and pumping in storage areas and kind of navigating that and feeling very isolated and demoralized when you're supposed to be feeling joyous about, this new person in your life, this baby, and believing that design could solve real world problems. We set out to actually incubate a freestanding lactation suite at the design studio where we both worked. And she was kind of and still is the left brain to my right brain creative. And very long story short, we came up with this idea of the Mamava pod or lactation suite. We placed our first unit in the Burlington International Airport in 2013. Again, a Vermont story. We knew the director of the airport. We knew that the airport had some blowback from not having lactation spaces. And we put that first unit in on a handshake and like $1 contract, because it's like a city organization. And we got amazing feedback. It got picked up
Mhm.
by USA Today. It was on the cover of every USA Today, and that's back when print
What?
newspapers, really
I just got
mattered.
goosebumps.
Yeah. And we were like, oh my God, we only have like a very rudimentary website, and we're a business kind of within a business, and a phone number that went directly to my cell phone. So that's where it all started. And that was in 2013.
So you mentioned a few things in that story that that we could easily pass over, but I want to pause. It's the advantage of smallness. People make fun of Vermont. We only have what, under 500,000 is our population still today. It's been that way. I've lived here for 35 years, and it's just small. Like you know people. You know someone who knows everyone, somebody else. It's that's one of the great things about the business climate here and for startups is that everybody's kind of got a neighborly, folksy way about them because we are all neighbors.
Absolutely. And that smallness, I always say, Vermont, too small to fail when we're dealing with, big policy issues or what have you in the government side of things. But our story even goes further than that. Down the road was one of our clients at the time, seventh generation, at the design studio. And we knew that they cared greatly about this issue. They had a baby product line in diapers and other things. And we actually convinced them, as we started to spread out beyond just Burlington to the airports in New York City, to be the sponsors of those very first units. So we were making things up as we went along. We had no investors. It's a capital heavy kind of business. We have to make a substantial thing and transport it and install it into a location. And we were proving a concept because it didn't exist before. So what we figured out is the airports had this problem. They wanted lactation spaces. We could give them to them for free if we could get seventh generation to underwrite it. And of course, seventh generation would love that great PR value. So that's really how we put the original, I think there was maybe 10 units in to that really large market of the New York City Port Authority airports. And again, it was proof of concept for where else this idea could go.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing. There's this collaborative, all for one spirit in Vermont, right?
Yes.
Like so many stories of I've interviewed all kinds of Vermont innovators, and there's always a connection between you guys.
Yes, I would say in the beginning, that is just magic. And I think there's also the kind of other boundary busting companies like Burton Snowboards and Ben and Jerry's and some of the others we think about in the beginning that is super helpful for business. And then your isolation, the smallness can eventually make things potentially a little bit harder. But all in all, being based in Vermont has been mostly all really, really good for our company.
I think the smallness, though, of the world is something that's everywhere. You just have to sort of be open to serendipity. For instance, I think I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking to you today because of Taylor Zarin. She is. We
Yes.
have a wonderful episode with her. Episode 192 is with an amazing innovator named Taylor Zarin, who has this breathtakingly new vision for porta potties.
Yes.
If that can be a thing, and they're going to change the world with that. Like, it's just, I cannot believe that it's like your idea and theirs and so many others is so obvious once you
Yes.
see it in place, but it
Yeah.
always takes this giant effort and leap to get there.
And I love how there's such parallels. We're like I always joke, like we're in the bodily fluids industry, and
Yes,
that it's
yes,
like
yes,
another woman. And I love the
yes.
name. They're really again using brand in a way that is calling attention to something, and brand and design. And their company is called Wasted, and they're basically figuring out a way to recycle and have reuse for, I think, fertilizing purposes of those of porta potty waste. Super brilliant, and they deliberately came to Burlington and into the Vermont economy to develop that company because they knew it would be receptive. And I like to think that maybe we influenced that a little bit, just knowing that a company that was sort of adjacent, we make something that people occupy and people produce a very different bodily fluid, but there are some parallels there for sure.
It's so true. And, they came from California, so it's not like they came from some place that would be, I don't know, that could seem more hostile
Right.
to young businesses. California is pretty upscale for that sector, but it's just incredible. And now, I mean, you've got that story. 2013 was your first installation?
Yep.
And now you're in all 50 states?
Yep. Yeah, we could not have imagined it. I mean, for us, we were identifying this pain point of kind of public spaces because that's what we were most familiar with. Airports and convention centers and even like, the stadium. I want to go to a football game, but I'm going to tailgate. I'm going to be there for this 3-hour game. And then I'm going to have drive home for an hour and a half. So those kind of places that we imagined. But what actually happened is those places became pollinators for everywhere else this was needed. So somebody would see our unit at an airport and then call us up and say, can you put this in my law office? Or we need this for our warehouse. Or it's so a blessing and a curse because we're mission oriented. We wanted to say yes to everything and we needed to say yes to everything just to keep the business going. But then we had to figure out how to make this happen in all these different verticals. So to place a unit in a healthcare facility or to even sell into a healthcare setting, so different from selling into an elementary school or to a big enterprise account like a warehouse or something. So that was something that took us by surprise, like a good surprise. And as the business grew, when one industry kind of slowed down or the pandemic happened, there'd be another vertical that would actually kind of save our skin because we were doing it all at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's so many questions. If the audience sees me writing, it's because I'm trying to keep track of my thoughts.
Yeah.
So many questions, even more than the 30 I already had written down over here.
Sorry if I'm going over.
No, it's perfect. I want to reel this in a little bit because I can remember a time in my life when I thought, oh, that's so people don't have to go sit in a chair in front of everybody, throw a blanket over their shoulder and nurse right there in public, which I think we've come quite a long way in the last 30 years. I had my last kid 24 years ago, and I don't know, I probably wouldn't have, I probably would have done that because I was kind of an earthy hippie sort, but it wouldn't have been comfortable to do that. But that's not what this is about so much. And there's a whole world of very unusual privacy needs that women have when they're pumping. And I don't think everybody in the public realizes that that's going on as much as it is. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so I think I share that with you. I would breastfeed anywhere. And when you're pumping, you are attaching yourself to an apparatus. You usually need to be sitting down. You have, you're pumping milk, you're filling it into vessels that can get messy. There is the need to usually plug in a pump. There are pumps that obviously work with batteries, and it's just really different. I think the other thing is with breastfeeding and with pumping is there's this letdown response. So your brain has to be in the headspace and comfortable and confident in order to relax your body, and then you're going to be more productive. So it's just really different. And as we designed our units, we understood they'd be used for both. But we really had to make sure that people understood that we weren't hiding breastfeeding. It was about actually having a conversation about all the different ways that you have to feed a baby, pumping, breastfeed. And even if you're using our pods to bottle feed, that's no judgment whatsoever. Sometimes it's the baby itself that needs to have a quiet place, whether they're nursing or bottle feeding. And so solving for that on a design perspective was something that was very deliberate. Like, okay, if she's using a pump, there's one setup, but if she's nursing, it's another. And if she has a companion or a toddler, so thinking about all of that in terms of the design of the space was really important. But that was something we had to navigate more in the beginning because we were brand new. We created the whole category, and we were worried that people might think that we were hiding breastfeeding. But what we found is that the women who were navigating this part of their life and had pumped, they totally got it. And they would often step in. Let's say something got posted on social media and we were celebrating, like, oh, there's a new lactation pod in this community center. And then people would say, maybe on social media, oh, you're trying to hide breastfeeding. And then we would literally just have to wait like a few beats. And then someone else would say, like, by the way, this is for pumping and it's about choice and every mom and baby is different. And we have to do so much less, if any, of that now because people just get it, right? And the moms who might have said, oh, I breastfed all my 6 children and blah, blah, like, well, did you have to work outside of the house? Obviously you had to work inside the house because you had 6 kids, but did you have to navigate that? And it really is not an issue anymore. But in those first early months and years, that was a little bit something we had to make sure. We, again, use brand and design to be positive, always respond in a really optimistic, supportive way. And we really wanted to stay clear of the mommy wars. We actually were deliberate. We had a manifesto about staying above that. And I think the mommy wars have lessened, I think, since when we were first starting out 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say that this is a landscape. Like, before you complain about your judgment about a landscape that you really haven't experienced or you don't know anything about, I my own experience with this taught me that not to complain or to comment on a landscape I know nothing about, because I was one of those moms. Yeah. Sasha, I think I mentioned in our pre-call, I had a 1 pound baby. Yes. 1 pound, the size of a Barbie doll, slipped right out of me and lived. And at 23 weeks, that was as close to impossible, 1,000,000 to 1 as it can be. And what we aren't thinking about, most of us, is that this pumping thing, that can be like with every single premature baby. They have to have all these tubes and things in their bodies, and they're not gonna be latching on, or that's not even in the mix. And then the other thing I learned, quite astonishingly, because I've been in healthcare my whole life, but I didn't realize that the woman's body produces a different kind of milk for the aged baby that has just slipped out of you. So they were desperate to get me to pump. Desperate. Because the chemistry in my body would have been finely tuned for a 23-week baby.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, that seems obvious after you really think about it, as much survival as is built into our physiology, right? But I didn't know there were people out there doing that. I just didn't even know that it was a whole world. And almost anybody who's experienced a premature baby goes through some part of this equation. Now, we had to do it just to feed her up to a certain point. But then, of course, with all those tubes going in and out of her mouth for the first 4 months of life, she didn't even know what suckling was. So then we had to teach her all that. And so I kept having to pump. I pumped for a year.
Wow.
Without a real nursing baby. And then that's another thing that you pointed out that I wanted to at least comment on. This isn't just going into a little room or a bathroom or whatever. It's a process. And one of the main things of the process that we don't appreciate is that there's physiology here. Mm-hmm. I had to sit there and look at a little picture of her for a minute, and I couldn't even see her face. I never saw her face for the first 6 weeks because they've got them covered all up with bandages and stuff. And I'd have to look at this little picture of her with her head, we called it her turban, all covered up, and her little frail body, and just to get things to let down. Yeah. So that's what these wonderful spaces are for, is to just close out the madness of the world outside and be present in the moment with one of the most fundamental human experiences that we would have the privilege to participate in.
Yeah. And our moms sometimes call them oases. And I think it is interesting, just coming from a design background, a fundamental human function with so little design dedicated to it, if any. They're getting better with breast pumps for sure. And there's a lot more options there and a little bit better with clothing. But like when you think about all the things that we have to feed adult humans or children, and it's wild to think how little has been considered, which is in a way good. It's essential. It's the essence of just being connected with your body, but we do need more infrastructure and support for it overall. Because
that's an aha moment right there, Sasha, is that we think about the time, money, and energy we spend on children's food or feeding children once they can pick it up and put it in their own mouth, but we're giving no thought to this whole for so much important. And that's just, and okay, so talk to us about being this groundbreaking, creating a category. That must have been, the wind must have felt at your faces, something fierce.
So as I was mentioning, we wanted to approach it. One of our brand values is bodacious optimism, and approaching something with this positive, not defensive position was really deliberate and important, because often our conversations are with facilities. And while HR might be sort of female dominated, broad generalization, facilities tends to be pretty male dominated. So we'd be walking into a conversation with, an operator at a warehouse or even some in the military and government side of things. And we never knew where this other person was going to be, like in terms of understanding lactation and breastfeeding. So we did it with a sense of humor. And we kind of like acknowledged maybe that it could be uncomfortable or giggly or whatever. And that breasts are great for lots of things, even beyond, lactation, right? And so that was huge. And then we were often really surprised at how our customers or our partners sometimes were well even beyond what we knew. Like we have lactivists, or like sometimes we call them papa vas. You'd have a grandfather, in a facilities position who had a partner, a wife who breastfed all their kids. And now he was trying to support his grandkids and his firm belief around breastfeeding. So they were like, often lactivists that you would never expect, and have became our great allies to then take us to that next facility that needed lactation accommodations. So there was a great lift around educating. Good news was, as a category creator, you do not have any competition in the beginning. So we had a running head start, but bad news is you have to like knock on all those doors and figure all that out
and survive the pushback, because I'm sure you got splained a few times. I mean,
yeah. Well, that actually sometimes happened. I have one situation where there was a conversation with an investor very early on who did not decide to invest. And he said, well, I got your deck and I talked about it with my wife. And, she said that, she would just breastfeed anywhere and she wouldn't need this. Like, well, again, does your wife work outside the house? Right. And those were just non-starters when sometimes that would happen.
What about the wind at your front? Like, when did you, because I'm sure there was a moment when the wind felt much less at your face and more at your back. Because I think there's been an opening in society regarding this.
Yeah. So positively. And I remember one really great inbound lead. So I come from a real baseball family. My kids play baseball. My husband and his brother both played semi-professional baseball. We are based in New England, and so we are Red Sox fans. And one day, Mamava got a call from the Red Sox, and they wanted to put a pod in Fenway Park. So I always say, like, we got called up, but it wasn't for you, honey. It was for a Mamava lactation pod. So those were those days where you were like, oh my God. And then to go into like an iconic type of facility that's 100 plus years old of Fenway Park was also like, ooh, how is this going to fit there? Because really they're made mostly for indoor, and that's an outdoor park, and fun things like that. The other moments were, again, coming from a design background, MoMA as a location for our pods were always kind of on the vision board. And a few years back, we put a beautiful pod in to Museum of Modern Art in New York City and designed it in collaboration with the designers there. And it's located in a section that's public, so you don't have to have a ticket. So anybody who's like in New York and has our mobile app where you can find the pods can actually pop in and build their day around it. And I feel really proud about that one too.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. We've got to take a break, and we come back. That raises about 5 questions too. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll learn more about this process of innovation, this roller coaster ride, and some of the insights that Sasha has for us about how to stay on the ride and enjoy it.
You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness.
Okay, we're back with Sascha Mayer. She is the co-founder of Mamava, which is a lactation pod system that most of us have seen in airports, stadiums, and so forth. She is talking to us today about what it's like to be the creator of a whole category in an industry that didn't exist prior to their coming on the scene. And this notion of seeing a problem in your own life and then setting out to solve it is something we love to shine a light on here at the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. So thanks for chatting with us today.
No, it's so fun. Thanks.
Okay, so take us on the roller coaster ride a little bit. There's people, we're always encouraging people to my story includes, saying to myself almost every day in the dental office, hearing people lamenting about the negative news and how fearful they were of the future. And then me saying, God, somebody's got to do something about this. And then doing it again the next day when I saw an otherwise cheerful patient who was down about the negative news. And then finally one day I said, okay, I guess it's going to be me. So I'm sure you have your own version of some of the insights that you might want to share with folks who are probably right there. They're seeing a problem every day in their neighborhood, their community, and they might have some good ideas. They might have a unique background. Like you have a kind of an interesting background. Let's start back at that. You have an interesting background that wouldn't necessarily indicate a leap to where you are now.
Yeah, I guess there would be when I think back upon it, like sort of a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
So I was raised by artists.
Okay.
And then when I went to the University of Vermont, I studied women's studies and sociology. And I was really interested in public policy. So right out of school, I worked for then Congressman Bernie Sanders and, progressive policy. And then I realized that that was probably not the best fit for me. And I thought, my parents, I kind of navigated the world between artists and the real world. And who does that? Oh, commercial artists and design. There's like a business aspect, but they're working with artists. So I worked and I worked my way up for many years at the design studio where we were able to incubate Mamava and ultimately became a brand strategist, which is like the storytelling and the positioning around brands. So I think all of those things like policy, women's issues, design, and art did come together very undeliberately with Mamava. And I think for folks that are have an idea that follows them around like yours and like mine, which positively, like my kids are now 18 and 21, and I didn't start the business until my oldest was like 11. So although it was always in the back of my mind, we'd work on it a little bit, but it really didn't take off until 2015 when we raised our first money. So paying attention to that, seeing those signs, not letting go of it, know that sometimes it's a long haul and you can't do it all, right? Like when I had little kids, I probably couldn't have launched Mamava, and maybe culture wasn't going to be ready for it either. And then progress over perfection, which is like, don't hide the idea, have conversations, share, talk to a million people. And that is going to help you guide you down your path for sure. And that's a mantra I still use. Like, let's test and learn. Okay, well, how bad can it be? The stakes get a little higher as your company grows, but it's one that I think that entrepreneurs can be kind of precious with their ideas, or even, for lack of a better word, paranoid about like, oh, I'm going to share it and someone's going to steal it. It's like, well, if it's that easy to steal, then it's not that great of an idea.
Somebody's probably already done it.
Somebody's already done it.
Yeah.
There's the other side of me, which is like, how come maybe there's a reason no one's done this, because it's really super hard. Yes. But in our case, it worked out.
So that's one of the things in the earliest part of the conversation that I forgot to ask you about. So there's this need for all kinds of brains in the world. I have many. I have a decade of loving to write articles and interview people who think differently than the rest of us. Whether you can give all kinds of labels out there, but our brains are wired differently. There's no doubt about it. And the benefits to that over time, especially in collaborations. Like right now, our article that's up today, the day of this interview is October 9th, and we just published an article with the most amazing artist and chemical engineer collaboration at the University of Ohio, or Ohio University. They both saw a problem in Southern Ohio with toxic waste in the streams that turned the streams to bright orange, toxic sulfuric acid orange. And they didn't even know that they both existed at the same university, working in the shadows on the same problem of what to do with the sludge. The artist was trying to turn it to paint. The chemical engineer was trying to turn it to paint. But they didn't have a big piece of the puzzle that they needed from each other, and accidentally they met one day. It's a fabulous story. So getting back to what you mentioned about the left brain, right brain, John will tell you, the guy that I interviewed, John Sabra, he is the artist. He's just out there. And he says you need the person who's the anything goes artist, imagination person. And then you need the linear thinker who could actually make it happen. In his case, it's this chemical engineer partner that he's got. So talk to us about that aspect of things. Like, people succeed in groups, don't they, Sasha?
Absolutely. And I also, this definition of an entrepreneur I like is you're not really good at anything specifically, but you're really good at getting people to see your vision. and getting people to do things for you, which sounds manipulative. It's not that way, but like, and there's value in getting people to see your vision and mission. So as I mentioned, Christine is really the left brain, the process oriented. She still is the head of operations at Mamava. So she was key. And although, the idea originated with me, I realized that as we were incubated within the design business, I needed that ally to kind of balance us out and move it forward. When I didn't have the juice, she did, and vice versa. And then the owner and creative director of that design studio also was a huge ally and was generous with when we had room in our schedule that wasn't dedicated to our design consultancy, that we could work on this. And he would weigh in and is still a board member. His name is Michael Jagger, still a board member to this day. And then it's just all of those other people. My dad, as I mentioned, is an artist. He's a sculptor. And he actually would come up and would do design charrettes. And some of the work that he did with us didn't actually end up maybe in the product, but it was just like that moral support, and it's like, you'd also fail fast, fail cheap, right? Oh, that wasn't going to work. Let's move on. So it goes back to, again, sharing that idea, because you're going to convince other people to believe in it. You're going to get better at selling your idea the more you share it. And then you're going to get those people along the way who can actually help.
Yeah.
And so that's been really key to us.
So that getting those people who can actually help, that is part of John's story too. They, even when they came up with a way to make pigments out of this toxic waste, they weren't quite there yet. They had to meet the acquaintance of an amazing community action gal in Southern Ohio who had all the contacts in government and grants and all that world that they needed desperately. Is there a third layer to your success story? Like, what did you have to be open to that may not have seemed obvious at first?
Yeah, so there's the third, fourth, fifth, sixth layer. One to mention was the Vermont Manufacturing Extension Center is a group that helps manufacturers kind of make connections to enable to do more manufacturing in Vermont. And we were connected with our very first factory through that relationship. And those folks were making kiosks that were going into like places like malls. And so they actually took our brief that we were working on for years and were like, oh no, this is like kind of an engineering problem. And we understand what you're going for. They came back with that first gesture of a curved shape. And they knew that if we wanted to actually start to mass produce them, the very first one is a stick-built prototype, but if we wanted to mass produce them, these are the things we would need to be thinking about. So even with all the design work we had done and some of the design product we had done, translating a beautiful object into a thing that could be mass produced or produced in a facility like we do in our factory in Springfield, Vermont, that was another connection that needed to be made.
Yes. And it's so easy to give up before you've realized what that third leg of the chair is.
Thank you for pointing that out, because we worked on it for a long time and we had our own little in-house skunk works. We're like, okay, it could be this, it could be that. Here's some like design, but they were like, designs that, weren't connected again to manufacturing or true engineering or even materials, right? It was like, it should be this type of thing, but it was not connected to the reality of actually making it in the world. So that was key.
It's so huge. Okay. We should not go much further unless we talk about this this thing that I've noticed with innovators like you, is that you have this way of turning crushing things into opportunity. Do you have any good stories like that?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say that I'm not a very woo-woo person, but I think in my belief around starting Mamava, there was some woo-woo things that happened. Like, I saw the problem, but I maybe didn't say it out loud. And then I was home on Labor Day, and we know motherhood is a labor of love. I was breastfeeding my second kid. I was reading the New York Times, and there was an article about this class system that had developed around breastfeeding, where women like me with autonomy in my job, I could take the breaks I wanted to, were being successful in their breastfeeding experiences and journeys. and women who might be punching a clock and didn't have the same support from their employer were not. So it was this idea of wealth begets wealth and health begets health. And of course, that struck me as completely wrong. And the article was written by Jodie Cantor, by the way, who people might know from her work with the New York Times on the many, many things. And that was sort of like one of those billboards, you know, in your brain, like, okay, there's a sign, it's a sign, you know. Similarly, we were on our way with Mamava, and maybe it was 2014, and we had decided to work with a manufacturing partner to do the manufacturing and the sales, and we would do the brand and marketing. And we had like, I think almost inked the full contract, and it was like a years long of work. And it was Mother's Day weekend. And so we were maybe, you know, two solid years of working on this. Like, this is going to make sense. This is how the market is actually going to, how we're actually going to bring it to market. I'm driving home, and my trusted contact at the manufacturer who we're going to do this deal with calls me, and he says, our new owner has just been arrested. He's being brought to federal court for fraud. And all of the materials, the first initial maybe stock of 15 units, which was like all of our money, are locked up in the factory in escrow, and we're gonna have to try to figure out how to get them back. So I remember thinking, I'm not gonna call Christine because it's Mother's Day weekend. I'm not gonna call Michael, our other partner, the creative director from the design studio. I'm just gonna like let this ride, and we're gonna have to see what we can do about it. In the end, thank goodness, because we totally control the entire business now, and we would have had this partnership that who knows what would have happened. But at that time, that felt like such a crushing blow for many, many reasons, because they were also going to be like funders of the partnership was going to enable that funding. So then it was a whole different business strategy. Okay, we're going to go have to get venture funding and build what the strategy for bringing it to market was going to be. So two sides of that, but reading the signs and maybe reading into the signs. And you never know when something really bad has happened that actually could have been the best thing ever. For the business.
Oh my gosh, that is such a diagnostic story of that concept. Yeah, I always encourage people. I like to tell the story of I've been using this good thing, bad thing, who knows? When something dreadful happens, I'm like, no, good thing, bad thing, we don't know yet. You know, so I slipped on the last little piece of ice this big on my deck one May morning and blew my kneecap into 7 pieces. It's so weird to look at your leg if you have no kneecap. Because half the muscles go on one side, half the muscles go on the other, and your femur's just laying there. It's very bizarre. And I said to myself, luckily, at first I was like, this changes everything. And then I was like, no, good thing, bad thing, who knows? And it's the reason why I was able to retire from dentistry and just do this 100% of the time. In the end, I couldn't go back to work because I was in a leg cast all the way from hip to groin, or toes to grind for 4 months. You can't zoom around a dental office with your legs sticking out and all the things. You know, so I always encourage people who are, even in just our daily life, just the good thing, bad thing. Innovators have a way of reiterating their own stories to us. I always like to get one of those kind of stories out of every innovator. How about, do you remember an aha moment that you want to share with us? Like some kind of insight that you use every day because of a situation?
Yeah, so we early on put together a very rudimentary mobile app because we wanted to show scale. And we only could put a few units in at a time as we were building the business. So we had a intern kind of scrape the internet for public lactation rooms. And so all the public pods that we had, and then the public lactation rooms, we put them on a little search app. So like I was going to, you know, I'm a mom, I'm making a trip. I'm like, oh, is there a lactation space here? Great. I'm going to find it. from there, the app has evolved to actually be able to be way more specific about wayfinding. It connects with our pods that have a smart lock, and you can open them using the app. It's totally free. It's a Bluetooth enabled thing. But one of the features that's also on that app is called Words of Support, where it's designed for moms to leave notes for each other, because again, it's kind of isolating. You feel like maybe you're the only person who's kind of doing this thing. You're away from your baby, and it's so alienating to kind of not be with the child. And even if you love your job, you feel like you're maybe the only one who's kind of gone through these feelings. So this Words of Support was really came from us going into lactation rooms and our pods and seeing moms leave actually written notes. And we then put sticky notes that we were leaving behind in airports. And then that kind of became like a bit of a fire hazard, although people still love that idea. I said, we're going to translate that into a feature on the app. And so that was like an aha moment in terms of user experience that feels really, really good. And then moms can even like comment on notes. And what's very supportive of Mamava is that often the thread will turn to like, thank you, Mamava, when it really is about the idea is that the community is supposed to be supporting each other. But it helps us, it's a hard business that we're in. And so when I am, getting down about something that's happening at work, I can look at those words of support and share them with my colleagues on the Slack channel, and it kind of bolsters up like, yeah, that was a setback, but look at what we're doing every day. And it's so, so important. It really is. Not a lot of companies can say they have that. And we put those words of support actually on a big screen at our factory, because those folks down there are like using their bodies to create this, and they want to be connected to what the mission is and know that they're making an impact in the world.
Celebration should be a lot bigger part of business. And if you don't have anything to celebrate in your business, then that should be a call for questioning why you're there.
Absolutely.
Too. We had the similar experience in the dental office. We had this one giant wall space, and we had drawers full of thank you notes and funny pictures that people drew and just stories and stories, because dentistry is it's a hard thing for every single one of us. There's like none of us that escape this moment when you're waiting for the dentist to give you good news or bad. And then if it is bad news, you have to go through this experience with somebody you have to trust and all that. So when we got notes, man, it mattered. And we just literally took this whole wall and made it into a picture frame with a million stickies and thank you notes and all over it. And we never took it for granted. The process sometimes was even to take something off that had maybe been written 17 years earlier and put it on the lab cabinet so everybody would look at it anew. You've got to take time to celebrate the wins and the lovely way that you're helping society and individuals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned something a second ago that I think is interesting, that people might find interesting who have any kind of a business mind. You have to serve two different populations. You're actually a B2B company, but your end users are individuals. And that is serving two very different masters.
Yes, and even demographically, I would say that maybe there's lots of B2B companies that maybe go to C, but demographically, as I mentioned before, like the sort of facilities, infrastructure kind of can be gendered. And then obviously moms, mostly moms and parents who are breastfeeding, very different. And it's been a struggle to kind of resource both sides of that. But again, harnessing the energy and the support of those moms and sharing their feedback with the buyers of our pods has been a massive part of a strategy and what's kept us in the game.
Yeah, I think if I were at Fenway Park and I looked around and there was a pod, I would think, well, that's thoughtful.
Yes.
I think it's part of what I call a gratitude economy, and I'd like you to comment on this. And so I'm watching who's succeeding and who's kind of stalling out these days in business. I think one of the things to come up from the pandemic is that we started to pay attention to the people we were grateful for in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that happened in dentistry because our governor, as you may remember, canceled dentistry for 10 weeks. Just, nope, never mind your toothaches and your broken teeth and all the things. No visits to the dentist for 10 weeks. And boy, that gave people a shocking little reminder of how important it is to have a network of healthcare people who just keep you going
Mm-hmm.
and who are right there on a moment's notice for you. So talk to us about this aspect in your little corner of the world. This I call it a gratitude economy. Do you feel like that is something that employers care about yet? Is that some employers or some facilities are looking to find ways to have their customers feel grateful in their environments or
Absolutely.
their workers? I guess workers would be a part of
Yeah,
it
I
too.
mean, the care economy is obviously a really big theme for what we're hearing about in terms of public policy in this presidential election, and gratitude for what essential workers, I think, in particular, are doing.
Yeah.
It,
That's where it started, don't you think?
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And again, because of our kind of technology and our mobile app, for as an example, when the pandemic hit, usage on our pods obviously flatlined. People weren't traveling, in the same way. People weren't going to their offices or going to stadiums. But the one place that the pods were still getting used was healthcare. So we could literally see that healthcare was still active. They were doing that hard work when the rest of us weren't. So I think that gratitude is key. I think also of, with so many people now able to work remote, how do you get people back into offices? How do you get them to feel seen and supported in their full dimensionality? And I believe lactation spaces have a role there, right? Making again, so you're not just that worker, you are doing the job of also caring for your family, even maybe when you're not with them. I think that's key. I think there's kind of a challenge actually now. My husband is a school teacher, and we know in this country that we have a huge shortage of teachers. And I think part of that is that the flexibility that teaching used to provide, meaning the time off in the summer and vacations, and maybe you were getting off at 4 o'clock or earlier to be able to be with your kids. Now that's a lot of people. So it's less desirable to have that idea of flexibility when, somebody who works at Mamava, we only are in the office 2 or 3 days a week, and you have a lot more flexibility, as we should. So I kind of digress there, but I think appreciation should be something that people are thinking about as a dimension of, how they treat their employees and their guests at their facilities.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know. I think the attention economy is in our rearview mirror. Again,
I
I could
hope
be wrong.
so.
But this just advertising and advertising and advertising and just interrupting us and just trying to get our attention in any way possible. I just know that the generation younger than us has their brains just tune it out. They don't even see advertising anymore.
Yeah.
And the way that I see the most loyalty in my patients, the things they talk about, the products they love, the companies they love, it's all about this feeling grateful for a trusted advisor in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're telling me about the ability to share notes with each other and be such a positive influence in others' lives, it has to be baked into the cake at Mamava right from the start. So I thank you for millions of other people.
Thank you.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I want to ask you about original courage. So a lot of women innovators that I've interviewed have a story of some woman in their life who's sort of responsible for their original courage. It could be somebody generations ago that we hear family lore about, or it could be a neighbor that was just a shining example of somebody you want to be. It could be anybody. Do you have an example? We just talk about the men in our lives and their courage too much from my perspective. I think women, oh God, the deck was stacked against us almost all of human history. Do you have somebody with origin that gives you your original courage?
I do. I have inspiration and then I have courage. So I was thinking about this question, and my grandmother, she was one of the original business ladies. She was an immigrant from Germany. She basically married a childhood friend so she could get out of World War to Germany, and got off the boat, married my grandfather, and then proceeded to have a career kind of in the fashion industry, and never learned how to drive a car, but she would commute from her home in New Jersey until she was 75 years old to work in an office selling kind of costume jewelry to department stores. This is actually her blouse. I just realized that I was wearing. So she had a wonderful fashion sense. And that kind of icon in my life as of a business lady, I never really thought that a woman couldn't do that. And on the other side, as I mentioned, my mom is an artist, and she had 3 kids, and really invested her talents in us. And she had this thing that she would tell me when I was like wanting to quit something, frankly. And I think it's really a great thing to consider and to apply to lots of things. But she would say, well, if you have brass buttons, you have to polish them. So it's a great momism in that there's like a little bit of guilt there, and there's also a compliment. But by the way, I don't know if I ever really had the brass buttons, but she'd say like, I know that you might not like to run track or whatever, but you're really kind of good at it. So you actually have to, do that. And I think similarly, it's like, well, this Mamava thing is hard, but you have the special opportunity to solve this problem for others. So on both sides, there's sort of a nurturing side, and then there's like the inspirational side. And putting those two together, I think, would be my answer to that question.
Lovely. I love the breast button analogy there. It's my parents used to always say, my dad was a physician and my mom a nurse. They had horrific childhoods. They were both largely orphaned at a very young age. And yet they made their way through the world. And they used to always say to us, with good fortune comes great responsibility. Because they knew that by accident of birth, we 3 kids, my brother, sister, and I, had the opportunities to be successful that they never had, and that no one they ever knew ever had. And that they planted a seed in us that with that good fortune, that accident of birth, we had a job to do, and we better find it.
Yes, I think I use that one with my kids, like with great privilege comes great responsibility. I think that is a great one.
Yeah. They looked at it as luck. My dad, when he retired to be our local maximum security prison doctor.
Wow.
And he would come home at night and tell us the darndest stories from these guys from the south side of Chicago that wound up in prison. And he had this gut feeling that it was always one of those could have turned right, could have turned left things, and that he could have been in the exact same position that they were, had it not been for fate or serendipity or some accident of birth. So I love that about the people in our lives whose stories filter through us and give us a little wind at our backs when we need it.
Absolutely.
And that you're wearing her blouse right now is just...
I know. And it's got to be really, really old because she's not been with us for a while.
When they used to make things right. Okay,
right.
So last 2 questions. If this interview had just been 3 minutes long, just a brief thing. I know when my book came out, I got all these opportunities to be interviewed all over the United States because it was during the heat of the pandemic, and here was some lady saying happiness is an option. And, I had like 3 minutes. I'd written a whole book, and I had to reduce whatever I had to say in 3 minutes and say it right without perspiring and everything else. What do you really wish people knew? Is there something you've learned that might help us all along?
Design can solve problems in the world, and pay attention, because you might think that everything has been solved, but it hasn't. And I'm a firm believer in design and storytelling to be able to change minds and to make people see things that maybe were invisible. So I guess the advice would be pay attention, because you might be seeing something that could be solved, and you're probably the best person to do it if you've identified it.
The best person to do it if you've identified it, or maybe, as we've talked about sort of sideways here, maybe you're the supporter of the best person. Have you ever seen that fantastic video of the guy who's dancing on the hillside wildly at a concert?
Yes.
And the second guy comes up and starts dancing wildly with him. Well, there's a great business mind who takes us through that short clip and talks about how that works in the world, because it's actually the second guy who validates the first guy, who is a really key part of that moment. So
yes,
I think if we're to your point, if you stumble across somebody who has an idea, a design that solves a problem for your community or your neighborhood or even your family, don't hang back.
I love that example, because I had a lot of dancing guys and girls who came up along this crazy idea and created like a movement.
Yes. I'll put the link to that video on the show notes. That's one of the last things I want to leave people with, is that there will be a full article around this conversation on the Goodness Exchange, on the page for the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. And if you want to go and get a boatload of links and things, we'll be communicating with Sasha in the next few weeks to fill that article full of next steps, because I want you to be able to go away from this conversation knowing what to do next. And that's what we want to end with. Sasha, what can people do next if they're fired up from your words today? What has to happen next with your project with Mamava to really make it change the future?
Yeah, again, because we have the moms and parents who use the pods, they have to kind of create the demand. So if you know of a facility that doesn't have lactation accommodations, reach out to that facility, reach out to us and let us know. If you are a breastfeeding parent, or if you're, or what we say, a bosom buddy, like somebody who's going to be traveling or supporting a breastfeeding parent, download our mobile app. Because sometimes you need that other dancing person, like if you're going out into the world with or without a new baby. And we see that all the time, where it's like you have the partner who has actually downloaded the app because they're running interference for the breastfeeding parent, or the work colleague who was like, okay, we're going to be here and we're going to have this meeting, but I found on the app. So that's key. And just supporting the care economy. We know that more people can be successful in breastfeeding as we have a good policy that's allowing for paid parental leave, as an example, which is really, really important. Again, our mission is not about selling Mamava pods. It's about solving this problem holistically. And part of that is having everybody meet their breastfeeding journey as they want it. And not having it be dictated by the lack of infrastructure or support or leave or what have you. So keep on being squeaky wheel around good public policy as well.
Oh, that's so great. I love this idea of us being able to go to our employer, go to the place that we frequent a lot, the stadium, the event hall, whatever, the airport that doesn't have it, and just let people know how grateful you'd be if it was there. And that gratitude can go a long way. And then make sure you connect with Mamava and let them know that you're making those efforts, because I'm sure you guys would form a wave that goes in new directions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Sascha Mayer, a fellow Vermonter with us here at the Goodness Exchange, who is changing the world for millions. And thank you from everyone.
Thanks, Linda. This was fun.
Okay. Have a great day.